Okay, so let's go into the lymphatic system. So here are some things you're going to want to know. Just the antibodies in breast milk. What are the lymphatic organs? What do they do? What's your first and second response in immunity? The stages of red blood cell, the contents of the blood. What do active immune cells help regulate? What helps regulate other immune cells, basically, and what does the ducts drain into? So B and T cells. B cells are filtered before they enter the bloodstream. T cells migrate to the thalamus where they are matured. The red bone marrow, that part of the bone marrow contains blood stem cells that turn into red blood cells. How? Um, red blood cells, white blood cells are platelets, okay? Then you have that helper T cells. They help activate other immune cells. Here's the bone marrow. It's one of the lymphatic organs. Initially, I thought, oh my gosh, it's not an organ. But organs are just is just a name for, a complex set of system of tissues, that come together and make a system, right? So it's one of the organs. So the bone marrow and the spleen are the two main lymphatic organs, okay? The lymphatic cells are generated in red bone marrow, which is found in flat bone, so just like the image. Another thing to remember is the colostrum and breast milk contain antibodies called immunoglobulins. So think of breast milk, think of boobs, think of globes. Breasts make look like globes. Immunoglobulins is the antibody that is contained in milk and colostrum. The spleen has 75% red pulp. The remainder of that is white pulp. So the lymphatic function of the spleen contains lymphoid follicles that contain that uh, aggregations of T cells, B cells, and phagocytes. The lymphocytes and phagocytes monitor the blood for foreign antigens and respond in a similar way as the lymph nodes. The red pulp as an important reservoir for platelets and red blood cells. It removes the worn out red and white blood cells and platelets. So it has a circulatory as well as lymphatic function in that it breaks down and recycles old blood cells and produces white blood cells, which help fight infection. Okay. Associate this with the portal vein. Okay. It receives blood from the aorta via the splenic artery and it's drained by the splenic vein, which forms into the hepatic portal vein. What does the lymphatic and thoracic duct drain into? The lymphatic vessels unite to form the thoracic trunk, which accompany blood vessels and eventually unite to form two main ducts, the thoracic duct and the right lymphatic duct. So, which drain into the lymph into the left and right subclavian veins. So, what does the epitodes do? So, make sure you know that as well. They're antigenic determinants known as epitopes. So, okay, they're capable of binding to antigen-specific receptors on B or T cells and help elicit that immune response. So they help elicit that immune response. They help activate that immune response. MHC class. So there's class 1 and class 2. Think of class 1 like everybody gets in. It's the basic class. Class 2 is like that honors level class. Okay, so class 1 is found on every cell in the human body apart from red blood cells. They present antigens to cytotoxic T cells, and the cytotoxic T cells destroy that cell. In class 2 on this honor system, you got to be a little bit smarter to get in. So this only found on B cells, macrophages, and other antigen presenting cells. They present antigens to the helper T cells, okay? And that signals the cells infected and needs to be destroyed. So class 1 presents it to the cytotoxic T cells. Class 1 cytotoxic T cells. Class 2 presents it to the helper T cells. Okay, so class 2 presents it to the helper T cells. So class 2, you have that extra help. Maybe you need extra help because it's a harder class. Okay, thoracic duct. So the thoracic duct, I want you to think of Thor. I want you to think of thunder. Where does that thunder go? So just remember that it receives lymphs from the left side of the body and the lower right side. Then for the right lymphatic duct, think right, 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 right. The right side of the head and the thorax and the right arm. Innate immunity. Innate immunity is the first and second line of defense against infection and inflammation. It reacts in non-specific matter. That means it doesn't specifically target anything. It's just does it. Okay, so it doesn't provide any long-term immunologic memory. The first line of defense is the chemical and physical barriers of the skin, the mucous membranes, and that prevents pathogens from entering the body. The innate system provides non-specific but quick second line of defense. So the first line of defense is the chemical and physical barriers. What is that second line of defense? The second line of defense is that innate system. Okay, the innate system provides that. This line of defense consists of antimicrobial substances, phagocytes, natural killer cells, inflammation, fever that protects against a pathogen that has breached that first line, that has breached the skin, that has breached the mucous membrane. Interferion. Interferion, think interference. Interferion wants to interfere with and prevent the replication of these pathogens by interfering with protein synthesis and degrading that viral RNA. So they're basically large glycoproteins produced and released by lymphocytes, macrophages, and fibroblasts are what release that interferion in response to pathogens such as viruses. So viruses try to interfere with different RNA, DNA, protein synthesis, and interferion interferes with them. Okay? Neutrophil, think first responders. They're the first one on the scene. They are your trusted source. They're the first phagocytes to migrate to the site of tissue damage, and they get there by a process called chemotaxis, which directs the neutrophils to the area of damage in response to chemical mediators. Macrophages, think macro, they're hungry, they're very large, they want a large meal. So they're the large phagocytic cells that engulf sections of that damaged tissue and microbes. Then you have the monocytes. It's one cell that thinks that it runs everything. So they're the monocytes. They're also phagocytic cells. They arrive there and they engulf the microbes and they differentiate, they organize into different macrophages and dendritic cells. Then you have the dendritic cells. The dendritic cells, they're very spiky. So think of antigens. They're very spiky. Think of a flag. And they're kind of waving that flag up and they're presenting these antigens so they can be recognized by other lymphatic cells so that they can get eaten, basically. The basophils, think the base or the chemical, the base is filled. So what is it filled with? It's filled with a chemical called histamine that is going to make a filled inflammatory response, okay? So basophils are leukocytes that release chemicals such as histamine that produce that inflammatory response. Endophils enter enzyme and they exit that chemical, okay? So endophils enter the infected tissues within a few minutes. They produce enzyme which breaks down those chemicals, breaks down the basophils, the chemicals released by basophils, and they help reduce the inflammatory response. Natural killer cells, they do just that, they kill. And then you have mass inflammation, okay? So what makes blood, cells and platelets, and white plasma, okay? Thank you. Go through your course content, finish your study guide, review the videos before the OA, talk with the professor, take notes, be confident in the Lord, and pass your test. But there's a vital force and a spirit of intelligence inside of man. It is already inside of me. And the breath of the Almighty gives them understanding, according to Job 32, verse 8. Psalms 18, verse 29 to 34. With your help, I can advance against the truth. With my God, I can scale a wall. With my God, I can pass AP2. Hebrews 10, verse 23. Without wavering, let us hold tightly to the hope we say we have. For God can be trusted to keep his promise. God bring you here. He's going to bring you through it. He can keep his promise.